Hi everyone, or welcome back if you're new here. My name is Rachel and I am here today to talk to you about all the books that I have read so far in 2025. I was going to do sort of like a monthly wrap-up situation, but some months I read like 5 books and other months I read 10 to 15 books, so I just thought I'd do it as and when I feel, you know what I mean? I was thinking about maybe even doing seasonal wrap-ups at some point, but I'm just here to wrap up everything that I've read so far this year because I think I've got quite a lot to talk about and I'm really excited. I've actually had quite a few new favourites as well. So far, I think I've had like 4 or 5 stars already this year, which is kind of crazy for me, to be honest, especially since I had only 5 new 5 stars all of last year. So without further ado, let us get into it and let's begin. The first book I read this year was The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. So this is a very surrealist fantasy story. It is, I would say, an epic fantasy, but it kind of has about 3 different layers of storytelling in it. So the first layer, you are following a young man who has kind of had his world turned upside down by a series of events with his family. His grandma's died, his father has left him, and he's kind of recounting and remembering and reminiscing upon stories that his grandmother has told him about the old days. And you are also following him and this character as he enters a sort of dream world and a dream pantheon where there is a play being played out on a sort of magical dreamscape theatre, and there are gods and there are dancers who are depicting, again, these old stories that his grandmother has already actually repeated to him in the past. And then the final sort of perspective and layer of this storytelling that you're following is you are following these 2 young men as they live their lives that are being told through this dreamscape, and one of them is a young warrior with a kind of slightly mysterious past who always introduces himself as his like clan name, but no one's ever actually heard of this clan, and the other is a young prince who has become disenfranchised and very much distraught with the angle that his father and the empire as a whole are taking and the sort of destruction and callousness that they are reaping upon their landscape. And so he takes it upon himself to free his grandmother from a sort of eternal locked slumber / prison. And this kind of sets off a whole series of events in this old time. The prose in this are absolutely incredible. I loved the storytelling aspect of this. You can tell that Simon Jimenez is an extremely adept storyteller because the way he constructed these layers of storytelling were absolutely incredible. We have LGBT representation in here, but we still have this very harsh, I want to say like sort of Asian or it kind of falls somewhere for me between Central American and Asian inspired. I would probably need to research this properly to see what it is actually inspired by. That's kind of how it felt for me in terms of vibes. But it is truly a totally unique concept and totally unique world. And I really, really enjoyed this. I think I gave it a 4.5 stars out of 5. It didn't quite hit the full 5 for me just because it didn't really give me that feeling. There were a couple of little sections where I felt slightly more disconnected from the characters than I think I should have. And I think I should have potentially felt a little bit more emotionally invested in some of them, but overall I did really, really enjoy this. This was highly anticipated by me for so long, but I actually think I might like their other book, which is The Vanishing Birds, a little bit more from what I've heard about it, so maybe you'll see me read that very soon. I think I might pick that up on audiobook because this audiobook as well was fantastic. The next 2 books that I read I actually don't have physically because I listened to them on audiobook, and they were The Psalm for the Wild Built and A Prayer for the Crown Shy, both by Becky Chambers. I have not read anything by Becky Chambers before, and oh my god, have I been missing out? I now think this is going to be the year of my Becky Chambers / cozy sci-fi venturing because I absolutely loved these. These were so cute, so cozy, so incredible, and I just really feel like she hit with that messaging at exactly the right time for me personally. I'm gonna get a little sip because I'm getting a little dry. Like, I think I have heard a couple of people review these before and say that perhaps the messaging was a little bit overt, or it was maybe just a little bit cliche or a little bit like not cringe, but a little bit too on the nose for certain people. However, for me, I don't know, man. I just ate these up. They were so cute. A monk, a tea monk, who Sorry, I keep just stopping and going like, because all I can think about is how much I would love to live in this world that they're inhabiting. I feel like it is such a hopeful look at the future and what we could be and what we have the opportunity to make for ourselves as humans. We follow a tea monk named Dex, and they go by they, them. And they basically change what they have wanted to do as a job for a very long time because they're just not really feeling it anymore, basically, and they decide to become a tea monk, and they train to become a tea monk. They face the challenges of becoming a tea monk, and they actually become very, very good at it, and they love their job. They travel around. A tea monk basically is almost like a travelling comfort or therapist, slightly. They will come to your town, you will go up and request some tea and speak to them about your problems or just how your life's going in general, and they will provide you comfort, like someone to talk to, a safe space, and some tea to help with your ailments. They still don't feel fulfilled in themselves, and they are kind of struggling with this because they don't understand how, even though they're kind of doing everything right as this job that they've got, they're really good at it, everyone looks forward to them, everyone's relying on them, and they still don't feel like they are totally happy. And so they just one day decide to walk off trail. In this world, there are sections of land that are left entirely to rewild, as generations ago, bots basically gained sentience and decided to get up and leave and just walk into the wilderness to do their bidding as they would. And humans decided to allow this autonomy, and they have not seen them since. And when Dex decides to go into this wildland, he encounters a robot, and he is the first of many generations to ever encounter one. And their relationship is so wholesome. What Dex teaches the robot about humanity and what the robot teaches Dex about himself and his own humanity is so touching. Both the first and second books are so good. They're so cute. Like, this is the type of cozy fantasy / sci-fi. This is what cozy means to me. Sorry if you can see the boy in the corner here. He has brought me his toy to play with, but it's a world and some characters who are so truly comforting, like right down to your soul. So detailed and in depth and still give you that hopeful narrative and those hopeful vibes and the feeling of a warm hug in a book, and that is exactly what this was. For me, I really need some sort of messaging or some sort of commentary on how we can get to this place, or just like a gentle commentary on life. And that's the thing about being cozy. It needs to be gentle. It needs to be soft. It needs to be a welcoming embrace. Something that you really need to hear at just like a downtime to pick yourself up. And I really feel like these books did that for me so perfectly, and I could highly recommend them. I definitely think I'll be on a Becky Chambers binge this year. So yes, I gave both of these 5 out of 5 stars, and I absolutely loved them. Just absolutely chug that, and I've got chocolate all over my lips. The next book I read this year was Warlords of Wyrdwood. Now, this took me quite a while. I read this physically, and it is quite a chunky book. It is also very dense. So it was actually the first physical book I completed this year because I just absolutely smashed through those other audiobooks earlier this year. This is the second book in the Forsaken trilogy by R.J. Barker, who also wrote the Bone Ships trilogy, if you've heard of those. The first book in this are Gods of the Wyrdwood. And if you like a totally unique epic fantasy world, if you've read like a lot of epic fantasy and you're perhaps getting a little bit bored or hoo-ha with the same sort of medieval style setting, this is such a fascinating world. This is probably some of the best world building I've ever read. We follow a forester in this world, and in this world there are spire cities, which are basically huge collective towns of giant spires, spindles that just extend into the stratosphere effectively. They're so high, some of them are crumbling, it's very unusual. And there are also huge forests to the north and south and these forests are dangerous. They have so many eldritch sort of creatures existing in them. And they also have these god trees that again extend far beyond anything you can possibly imagine in terms of scale. They are like miles and miles and miles in diameter, and they extend, like I said, right up to the stratosphere. Similar to Avatar, like Blue People Avatar, not Avatar The Last Airbender, but also kind of similar to Avatar The Last Airbender. I feel like if you combined Avatar The Last Airbender with Avatar, Blue People Avatar, probably get something like this. Because densely forested, everything is connected, like sort of that sort of power in Avatar like blue people, but you also have firebending, magic wielding side of Avatar: The Last Airbender in this. So yes, if you like either of those, I would probably recommend this series because it is genuinely fantastic in terms of world building. All of the creatures are entirely new as well. So when you're listening to them described, you can imagine them so vividly, but you've just never heard or can imagine anything like it. They've really done a fantastic job in creating a totally unique landscape for this story to play out in. However, I will say the second book for me didn't quite grasp me in the same way that the first one did. I thought some of the characters took some interesting directions that I perhaps was not the most crazy about. You have three main characters in this. One's called Khan, one's called Udini, and one is called Ven. Ven is something called a Tryon, and this is another really interesting fact about this world, is that they have trans and non-binary characters. However, they're not actually known as this, they're known as Tryons, and they are revered in this society. They are seen as sort of a bridge between the two genders. Like, they are seen as a level of connection with both magic and the world and politics and emotion. I'm not trans or non-binary, so I can't 100% speak to it, but for me, this was a really, really interesting perspective on how being trans or non-binary can actually give you a totally different outlook and perspective on the world. And it was really nice to see this inclusion used so casually and not in a way that would forward the plot necessarily. It wasn't about the fact that they are a Tryon. However, this is part of their identity and it is part of how they become a powerful entity in this world. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed the first book. The second installment did kind of have some interesting character developments that I wasn't 100% keen on, and to be honest, I found it a little bit more boring than the first one, despite the first one being much slower and like not as much happening. I'm not super keen on where the story is going as a whole, to be honest, but I will still keep with it. I will still read the third book. It was really very much giving middle book syndrome, effectively, and I think I gave this 3 stars in total, whereas the first book I gave 4.5 or 4.75 even. It was a little bit of a disappointment, but I do think the third could pick up and it has a lot of potential still for people to love it, especially if you love, like I said, Avatar and Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you love both of those in a story but want something a bit more grimdark, this could definitely be for you. The next book I read was Lore Olympus Volume 7. I have been keeping up with all of these in the physical editions. I know you can get them for free. I know you can get them for free on Webtoon, but I just love reading them physically. I don't like reading anything off like a phone or an iPad. Like, I stare at them too much in the day to justify having to do that now. Also, sorry if you can hear the boy munching his bone. He's like sitting like just down here, like chewing away. Again, I can't really speak too much on this because it is the 7th installment in this series, but I just love them so much. This is a Greek myth retelling where we follow Hades and Persephone, sort of set in a semi-modern world in Olympus. However, the actual human world is still in the sort of ancient Greek times, and you are seeing some of these stories play out, specifically, like I said, between Hades and Persephone. What I love about this series is that although it is very cutesy and very light-hearted, it does still tackle topics that are really prevalent in Greek myth tellings as a whole in terms of the darker content. There are trigger warnings for sexual assault, abuse, parental abuse. There are lots of things going on in here that are actually very serious, but it handles them in such a way that you are so endeared with the characters, and although obviously it's not realistic or true to the original retellings, you are so invested and so in love with these. And I love this installment because we start to get a little bit of like a court drama towards the end, and if there's one thing you need to know about me is that I love a court drama. Big Little Lies, season 2, it was giving that a little bit. But yes, I am very invested. I love Hades and Persephone, and the artwork. Oh, guys, the artwork. It's so pretty. The palette is just like delicious. I love them. I love them so much. I love Hades and Persephone. I cannot wait to see where they go. And he's on like a little bit of a perceived, at least, villain arc at the moment, and I am living for it. She's so cutesy and so wholesome that I just want to be like, fight your corner, girl, get it. But yes, I love the series so much, and I think I gave this installment either 4.5 or 5 out of 5 stars. Again, such high ratings so far. I've been doing so well this month. Next book I picked up was Gorse by Sam K. Horton. This, I had been so intrigued by it because look at this cover. I don't know if you can see, but like, it's creepy as it sounds, the dead bird with like the sort of forestry emerging from it, just like, oh, that really called out to me. But the premise of this is that we are following a historical town in about the late 1700s set in Cornwall, border both the moors and the ocean. This town is still very closely linked to folklore and fae creatures, and there is like sort of a watcher or protector called the Lord Keeper who lives on a hill and protects this townsfolk from the peskies, pixies, fairies. We're talking very like Holly Black, very classic traditional tricksy folklore in this. It's not like high fae, sexy Akamath fairies. These are very much the classic folklore fairies in this. Some of these pixies and goblins and sprites, etc., some of them are good, some of them are benevolent, some of them are little house spirits who will clean your house, others are not so good. And at the start of this, we open on some murders that have happened in this town where people have been found dead with like a bloody red handprint like around their throat or around their face, and they think it is the Lord Keeper failing to protect them from some sort of malevolent creature that has got through. And so a lot of the townsfolk are turning to the local pastor who was once friends with the Lord Keeper. They had some sort of fallout that you don't quite know until the end of the book, and the story follows from there. We also follow a young girl who is sort of an apprentice to the Lord Keeper, and she was by far my favourite perspective. I feel like I quite struggled with the first half of this book, mainly because it follows his perspective, and he is just a whiny, stuck in his mud ways old man, and that really, really bothered me. He's so ignorant in seeing how the times are changing, how the people were reacting. Like, he was just so steadfast in his ways and just ignoring the change of the current and not going with the flow at all, that it was really becoming bothersome for me as a reader. Whereas she, being much younger, she is much more flexible. She knows more of the townsfolk. She knows how the sort of tide is beginning to ebb and flow in the direction of Christianity, and how perhaps maybe if he could adapt to that, it would still allow for the folk and the small creatures to coexist with this new Christianity that's coming into this town. And it was a really interesting read. It was very, very atmospheric. If you're looking for an old folk style atmospheric sort of murder mystery situation going on, then I would definitely recommend this to you. I really enjoyed the second half of this. There is like an underworld, there are creepy creatures. It is very good and it is very strong. I just think from my personal perspective is that I have read quite a few stories in a similar vein to this, and I think if I'd read this first, I would have absolutely loved it, given it 5 stars. But I've read quite a few other stories that are very similar and do a similar thing, that I wasn't really surprised by the plot twists, and I did kind of predict most of what was going to happen. I also feel like I have read other books where the atmosphere and the plot and the storytelling and the characters have all been better in different aspects. So for me, this was just a 3.5 out of 5 star. Like, I still really enjoyed it. It wasn't necessarily a fault of the book. I think it just wasn't the most original thing that I have read in this whole genre, and therefore I can't give it like a full 5 star because I have read, I think, better. But I would still definitely recommend this if you love an atmospheric, folky, fae story. The next book that I read was The Phoenix Keeper by S.A. MacLean. And I saw that with a really jovial tone. However, I really didn't like this book. I'm sorry. This is actually a really popular one at the moment, and it is a cozy fantasy, so, you know, of course it's going to be popular. Following a phoenix keeper who works at what effectively could have been San Diego Zoo, but is set in a sort of alternate world, and they are trying to set up a phoenix breeding program for their one lonesome little phoenix who they tend and care for in this zoo. In this world, we have magical creatures that have been poached and hunted for their magical gifts/abilities. There are very few left, and at the start we open with a different zoo has had their phoenixes stolen, and so she has the opportunity to set up a breeding program at her zoo, and you basically follow her trying to achieve that. This is sold as an adult sapphic cozy fantasy, and I don't think it hits any of these points. Hear me out. The writing for this was so YA, it was so juvenile. The main character felt like a 16-year-old that was doing like a work experience for school. It really felt to me like the author wanted to write a YA book, but because of the current trend with cozy fantasy and adult sort of romances, they were forced to make it an adult, and also forced to make it adult because it would not be feasible for a teenager to be running this department in this phoenix keeping program, if that makes sense. So they had to make her older, but she acted like the most whiny, irritating, like 15, 16-year-old. Like, girl has stage fright. This is coming from someone who is diagnosed and suffers with terrible anxiety. She has anxiety in this, and I genuinely thought the rep was atrocious. I thought it was so badly done. It was so badly done on so many levels. Some people it might relate to, but for me personally, I was beyond irritated with this person. Like I get it. I get having anxiety. The way that this main character handled her having her anxiety and also spoke to everyone around it and just dismissed everyone around it, like, my guys, I feel like I need to just take a moment because I'm just getting angry. She thinks she knows far better than anyone else in her field, anyone else in the zoo. She is trying to like pursue this bloke for half of it who's just so cringe. Like, it's so cringe. It's so cringe. Like, there is a sapphic love interest in this. However, this love interest does not actually become a love interest till probably like 80% of the way through the book. And we get like maybe 2 scenes with them together. Like, that's not a sapphic love interest. And even then, they're not explicit in any sort of way. So I did not understand why this was marketed as a sapphic romance, given that, like I said, the romance did not even come into it till about 75-80% of the way through the book. That's not a romance to me. That is not a romance. She literally has a separate love interest for most of that series who is not sapphic. So why are you marketing it as a sapphic romance? Insane. And not only that, but she treats said sapphic romance like shit for the entire book because she has this sort of like prejudice against it for something that happened in college. But when you actually find out what happened, like, obviously she kind of loves her in her head, but her inner monologue is so bitter and so arrogant and so up herself, it really, really annoyed me the entire time. For someone who hates speaking in public, she also hates speaking in public, and she hates the love interest for being able to do that, but in a way that is just, it comes across so bitter and juvenile and immature, and I could not stand the main character. The actual phoenix keeping in general was quite boring. You are literally just following effectively a zookeeper. There was no need for this to be set in a separate world. Like, you could have literally just had this in this world in San Diego Zoo, but with magical creatures. Like, you didn't have to call it, what is it called? So you didn't have to call it the you didn't have to call it the Sam Tamculo Zoo. Just call it San Diego Zoo. That is clearly what it's supposed to be. That's clearly the environment we're in. It's such a shame because this is like one of the most beautiful covers. And this is just a standard edition, but like, look at the map. It's so gorgeous. And I was so excited to love this. And I just really didn't. Like, I'm actually talking about it and I'm getting more angry than I feel like the rating I gave it. I think I gave it a 2.5. But really, I think I'm going to lower this to a 2 because I truly had a rough time with this one. The main character, I cannot express to you how irritating the main character is. This felt like the author wanted to write a YA book about zookeeping and conservation and animals, but needed for some reason to make it an adult romance and to market it as a cozy fantasy and have magical creatures in it instead of like real creatures. And like I said, it just really came across so juvenile, so reductive of people with actual anxiety, and I just really didn't enjoy it. Some people might really like this. I feel like I could have perhaps related to this in the anxiety terms when I was maybe 14 and trying to give a presentation in like school, but again, you're marketing this as an adult fantasy, so why is this girl acting as an insufferable like 12-year-old? Literally, I cannot even express to you how juvenile the voice of this main character is, especially when they're supposed to be 28 in a public-facing position in their zoo. Like, what do you think's going to happen? You think you don't have to talk to the public when you are a zookeeper who has to give presentations about animals and you're trying... Girl, get over yourself. Okay, I'm done. This, 2 stars. It was bad. Would not recommend. For so long about that, and I actually need to go to work soon, but let me just finish up. The next one I read was Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. You will probably see more of this in a vlog that I'm doing soon, or have already done, so keep an eye out for that. I really enjoyed this sequel. If you don't know, Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands is the sequel to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which I read a few years ago and then reread this year in preparation for this. And it follows Emily Wilde, who is a dryadologist who works at the University of Cambridge in this sort of like alternate world in the sort of late 1800s, early 1900s. And she is a researcher of fae and folk, and she journeys to a different land to complete her encyclopedia and do some more investigating. And in this, we are looking at her when she's trying to create a map of the other world. We also follow Wendell Bambleby, who is a fellow research doctor and works at Cambridge with her. And he is the bane of her life. However, she kind of, she kind of likes it. And they are so cute together. I always pitch this as Grumpy Sunshine, except he's the sunshine and she's the grump, and he is very Howl's Moving Castle coded, so definitely keep that in mind. It is a fantastic series. I am so excited for the third one, which comes out very soon, and this was a really great second installment. I love the introduction of the other characters, of Rose and her niece as well, and yeah, they got up to mischief, they got up to... I really enjoyed the introduction and investigation of the new Fae and the new area that they're in. And overall, it was just an absolutely fantastic time. Love this series. If you don't like necessarily quite dry, diary formatted things, you might not like this. I know the writing style isn't for everyone, but I absolutely ate this up. The next book I read was actually a non-fiction book called Disney High. And this was so much fun. If you weren't a Disney child, just skip to the next book, because this, if you're a Disney child, was for you. If you grew up with Disney Channel, That's So Raven, Lizzie McGuire, Sweet Life, Hannah Montana, Wizards of Waverly Place, like, this is for you. It's about the rise and fall of the tween empire that was Disney Channel. And it kind of takes a look at behind the scenes, at the cast, at what played out to create a lot of these roles, how the casting process went. And it was so much fun. I loved this. You listen to it on audiobook and it is on Scribd, so give it a look if you're thinking about listening to it, because oh my god, I love the chapters on Hannah Montana specifically. Wizards of Waverly Place were great as well, as were the Sweet Life ones and how they kind of came about, as well as the earlier sort of Raven Seymour days too, because that was kind of like my era, so I was really heavily invested in that, and this was just really, really great. I think I gave it a 4.5 stars. I think I could have given it higher if it had actually went into the decline of Disney Channel more, because I actually don't think Disney Channel even exists anymore at this current day, and I would love to have known more about that, but it kind of just peters out after the Demi Lovato stage and instance in that. To be honest, like, I knew up to that, so I was kind of curious as to what had happened since and how the decline went steadily downhill like that. I think there is a lot to be said about the lack of children and teenage media these days and how that is kind of affecting teenagers and making them grow up much faster. You know, you've got 11-year-olds watching TikToks of fully grown people and trying to emulate that, rather than watching stuff like Hannah Montana and Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and trying to emulate them instead when they're watching real life tween people. So yeah, I think I would have liked to see a little bit more of a decline in that and how it kind of affects current day society. But I did really enjoy it, and I feel so privileged to have grown up in that era, because oh my god, the nostalgia that I got when reading this, it was so good. It was so good, and it was so informative as well, and I would highly recommend if you were a Disney child like me. The book that I read was The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I loved this. Again, 5 stars. I have read so many good books to start this year off. I am literally, it's no joke. This will also have been featured in my previous vlog, so I won't go into as much detail about it. But in this, you are following a detective and someone who has been augmented to be able to remember everything they see, everything they touch, everything they smell, and how they work together to solve a mystery of a man who has exploded effectively with trees coming out of him. Obviously, he has died because he is eviscerated by this. And this has happened not only to this man, but to a couple other people in this empire. And in this world, you are living in like a walled empire sort of system, very much Attack on Titan vibes, where there are giant creatures who are coming and attacking the outer walls every so often. And very much Attack on Titan, think Pacific Rim as well, sort of energy, very kaiju based. And I love the setting of this. It is kind of Asian inspired, I would say, as well, but very overgrown and very mossy and very dank. And it was just absolutely fantastic time. I loved the main characters. I loved the world building. It was really incredible, and the mystery kept me on my toes. I don't tend to read many mystery fantasies, and I typically don't like murder mysteries at all as a genre, so this blew me out the water. I absolutely loved it. 5 out of 5 stars. Would definitely recommend, and it makes me really want to both read The Drop of Corruption, which is the second book, which is coming out very soon, and also go back and read Foundryside again, because I read Foundryside and then never continued, and I need to read Shorefall and the rest of the books in that series because they were really good too. But yes, definitely recommend this. The book that I read was Adrift in Currents, Clean and Clear, and this is the 10th book in the Wayward Children series. These books are just short little novellas, and there are quite a few of them now, and they are all sort of portal fantasies that follow children who escape sometimes quite dark situations in their family or home life and are taken into another world with the message, be sure. They are spat back out eventually through various circumstances and end up back either in their childhood body or as a grown-up, having been missing for like 5 to 10 years, and they all end up going to this home for wayward children ran by a lady called Eleanor Westwood. Sometimes you get individual stories that just follow one child's experience in their other world, and this was one of those, and I really, really enjoyed it. In this we follow Nadia, who was a young Russian orphan who was taken and adopted by American parents and kind of forced to conform with that. She also has a disability where she's born with only one arm, and her new American parents don't understand why she doesn't want that fixed, see her as not being whole, where that's all she's ever known. She feels like she's a totally complete and full person as is, and so she ends up escaping into this turtle world. It was a really, really interesting installment. It was really nice and well thought out, and I love seeing her life and how she grew older, how she matured. And then it was really heartbreaking with the ending of this to see all that be reverted. And it was a fantastic installment, and definitely a good place to jump on if you're wanting to jump onto the series. If not, just start from the beginning and read all 10, because they are fantastic. And like you said, so short, so you can definitely binge them very quickly. Next book I finished was The Dryad Storm by Laurie Forrest. If you have watched my last vlog, you may have seen me lose my mind over this book, because what the hell happened here? I am so serious. It was terrible. I gave the first 2 books in the series 5 stars. I gave the third one 4.5 stars. And I gave the 4th one 3 stars. So there was a bit of a decline towards that 4th one, but I thought it might have just been trying to set up for the final book and had a lot to kind of maneuver about. So I was like, we'll give it its due. We'll give it its due. We'll not judge it too soon. Hopefully the 5th one will pull it out the bag. And boy, did it not do that. Truly, I have never seen an author lose the ability to write the way that Laurie Forrest did here. This was absolutely atrocious. What happened here? Girlie, get an editor, or get a better editor, or fire the current editor and get another one, because what was going on with the writing? Jesus Christ! There was so much repetition, there was so much cyclicity in the writing techniques, where you were just constantly being forced on your throat. Like, they did this because they had this magical power that allowed them to do this, but any time they used any sort of that magical power, once that was established, they would repeat that was why they had that. So, I don't know, for example, they felt this fire magic through this bond, so every time they felt anything, that would have to be stated. So anytime anyone used any sort of magical ability or any sort of feeling, which it ended up boiling down to a lot of cases, just a feeling through some sort of bond to whatever, would explicitly state that every single time, and it drove me absolutely ballistic. There were far too many characters. The prologue was almost 200 pages long, if not longer, and we didn't have a single perspective from the main character, or who has been the main character for the first 4 books. We did not get a single perspective from her until almost over 200 pages into this book. What do you mean? Why? Why? It was insane. And she was shoved aside for totally needless, unnecessary, copious amounts of side characters who you don't care about. So many sort of love stories and pairing people off. It was just abysmal. It was truly one of the most disappointing endings I've ever read. And they had such good themes of environmentalism and of religious trauma, and they just fumbled the bag so hard with it. Oh, it was actually painful to watch. And this is so sad, because the start of the series was so strong. And yeah, to end up like this was an absolutely dire disappointment, to be honest. And the final book that I've read recently is Iron Widow by Jirenjie Zhao. Apologies if I pronounced that wrong. But this is a YA new adult sort of sci-fi story. It is quite sort of heavily inspired by Pacific Rim, I would argue. It has a lot of themes of feminine and female rage woven very strongly throughout it. And we follow Zacian, who is pictured on the cover here, whose sister was taken to fight in a war against these creatures that are constantly trying to invade their borders. And to fight these creatures, this empire has come up with these giant battling robots made up of chi metal, or like a material made of chi, which is piloted by a male and a female pilot. However, the male pilot has more or stronger chi essence, which means that every time they pilot these creatures, the female pilot then will die. So basically a lot of women across this empire are sent as sacrifices to fight this war in the name of these men winning these battles effectively. And her sister has been sent to do this, and she is killed by one of these pilots. So she offers herself up so that she can go and murder said pilot. But things actually begin to spiral from there when it turns out that she has very strong chi herself. However, she has also got a disability in that her feet have been bound, and it talks a lot about that and goes into a lot of the sort of historical discussions about that as well. I both really enjoyed this, but also there was a definite sort of lack of subtlety for me in the messaging. Although I love the messaging, I love a female rage book, which I can sort of be a little bit more lenient with since it is YA, and obviously that does need to be made a little bit clearer than for adult readers. However, it did still feel like I was being beaten over the head with this messaging, and don't get me wrong, they are correct. Female rage, let's go. I support women's wrongs, you know, which is to say women deserve equity and equality. So I support this and I get the messaging. However, I also, like I said, don't want to feel like I'm being beaten over the head with it. I think a lot of it was very direct on page, and some of it was a little bit cringe. Some of it felt like I probably perhaps read it in an Instagram reel somewhere, you know what I mean? And this was very good and it was very strong, and I would definitely recommend it to perhaps a little bit younger readers than myself. And I also think that it includes a polyamorous relationship, which is quite an interesting take, and would definitely recommend that if anyone's looking for that representation too. But overall, I did enjoy it. It was entertaining, but it wasn't my favourite. Again, just because of that super overt, really down your throat on your messaging of this, which I feel like the themes and the plot of the story, you're going to get that anyway. Like, that is the point of the story. You don't then need to additionally say that written for word on page. Like, I am doing this because I'm a mad woman. Like, yeah, we know. You deserve to be mad, girly, because what you've went through is enough for me to know that you will be mad. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm not really articulating that particularly well. And why I could honestly write a full video essay on why we still need a balance of subtlety and on-page messaging in books. When you don't leave it to the reader to be able to sit and ponder these on themselves, and they're not going to think about that and really ingest that messaging post-read because you've just read it, so it's already inside you. Whereas if you read something and then you can be left to sit and think about it afterwards and ponder it, it really gives it a lot more time to seep into you, and the messaging will, in my opinion, root a lot further than you just reading it on a page and being told that. I think if you are left to calculate this for yourself and to really consider the implications of what's happened in it rather than just what's been written word for word on the page, I think that can give a lot more of a deeper messaging, and I think it also allows the reader to develop more complex thoughts and nuance about your own story. Either way, I did enjoy this, but it wasn't my favourite, and I will probably still continue with the sequel very soon, so you'll probably hear about that as well in the next wrap-up. And that is everything I have read so far this year. Thank you so much for watching. I've really enjoyed wrapping this up for you. It's been a bit of a funny reading year so far because I think I've been a little bit all over the place with like what I'm focusing on reading, but my ratings have actually also been very high. So hopefully we can keep that ball rolling. I definitely think I'm going to be reading more sci-fi this year, and I also probably want to get into a little bit more speculative, dystopian, and maybe even some classics as well thrown in there, because I think a lot of the fantasy, especially high epic fantasy I've been reading at the minute, has been a little bit disappointing in comparison to when I've been reading some sort of like fresher genres to me. So yes, you'll probably see a little bit more sci-fi, definitely still some romantasy and epic fantasy, of course, definitely some more sci-fi, and I also think some more adult literary romance fiction as well, because I have been lacking in that for this first part of the year, so I need to make up for it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you soon with another video.